Bears are yet to loosen their grip on local bourse as sell pressure is witnessed in stocks like Seplat. Victory George, investment research analyst at Meristem Securities, joins me now for more market movements. Victory, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Esther.
Well, let's start with market highlights this week. We've seen, mixed trading, but we've seen the likes of Seplat also driving the market lower. We've also seen this week, Access Holdings getting approval from the SEC to launch or float its rights issue, of course, as part of its recapitalization. Let's start with Access Holdings. It's one of the market highlights this week. Talk to us about the opening. We saw the share opening at 19.20 kobo. There was a bit of an appreciation, but still within that 19. But we did see close at 19.35. But there were questions around its fair value, its the strength of its future earnings potential, with the chairman trying to clarify at some point. But what are your thoughts in terms of how investors view the stock, the share price, and the promise of bigger earnings coming?
Yeah, thank you very much for that. Access Core, like you mentioned, is one of the strongest banks listed on the exchange, and we did a recapitalization exercise going on. We've seen different banks announcing their intentions to come to the market, to raise funds, mostly through public offer and or rights issue. So with Access Bank coming to announce that we are issuing a rights issue to our investors, and one thing to notice that the price at which Access Bank is offering this is higher than what the current market price is. They're offering 19.75, and like you mentioned, it has been doing around the 19 to 19.35, like close today. So for investors, this is largely an upside, considering that the offer price is quite higher than what it's currently trading at. And another thing to consider for investors, the performance going forward, was outlook for Access Bank. On one hand, Access being a bank with historical strong performance in terms of earnings, gleaning from previous earnings performance, across revenue and bottom line as well. So the outlook is quite positive for Access, and with this additional funds, we expect that will continue, to drive the company's key metrics, in terms of its ability to create value with these funds. For investors, the outlook is likely positive. Now,
I know that a lot of cherry picking happens, within the banking sector. There's always, obviously, the tier ones are usually a favorite, but we have a couple of tier twos that are also investors' favorite. Fidelity will be one of them. Yeah. Are you seeing a pattern in terms of how investors are shifting sentiments, or where you're seeing more volumes based on what they've seen so far, the announcement by some of these names, and the route they're going to take or they plan to take to raise their share capital?
Yeah, largely the route that most banks would take would be to either issue, come to the market freshly to issue fresh shares, or a rights issue or private placements. So we've seen banks using more of the rights issue and public offer as a preferred route to raise funds in the market. Well, the outlook generally, or the way it's perceived from investors, and like I mentioned, there's that cherry picking, and there's that consideration on the performance for these banks going forward. Well, the tier one banks obviously would have that incentive in terms of having that presence and being known as the top banks amongst all the other banks listed. So we expect that to continue to drive the outlook for the banks. Right.
Let's talk about, we've seen, I mentioned Seplat earlier, but let's talk about, market trading generally. Where did we see the volumes, and who were the best, the top sellers this week?
Well, this week, the market has largely traded on a mixed note, mostly with a bearish tilt. Even yesterday, I think the market closed flat. Largely, the market closed down yesterday and it closed flat 2 days ago. Right. So the investors are really much on that
sitting on the fence, or
yes,
just waiting for some kind of major catalyst.
There's that cautious trading from investors, this period, considering a lot of factors and considering how the market performed, in the first half of the year. So there's still that mixed, sentiment towards the market, driven by, a couple of factors. So this week, that mixed sentiment, continue to play in the market. We saw sell-offs, like you mentioned, on Seplat, which, was a huge driver for the positive market performance in H1. So it's basically investors, capitalizing their profits, re-strategizing for the next period.
Right. So, we're also expecting some economic data on the 15th of July. I believe that's next Monday. We have inflation data on tap. We also have MPC in the upper week. Is it, investors paying any attention to any of these? Yeah,
of course. Investors are largely going to be considering, macroeconomic indicators, especially in the second half of the year. Inflation, things like the FX stability, as we saw that increased foreign investor participation in the market in the first half. So, macroeconomic indicators like FX are quite key for investors at this point. For inflation, we're expecting, to see that slower pace of inflation in the second half of the year, given the base effects in the previous period. We expect that to play in. Also for the MPC, largely, we're expecting the MPC to, likely, pause on their hawkish stance in the second half of the year.
So you're not expecting, for this month's meeting, you're not expecting any hike at all?
Yeah, we are largely not expecting a hike. Well, we expect that the committee will largely consider, these factors into their, their position. And largely, with that, the key indicator would be, where inflation is going. So if we likely see, that slower, pace of inflation, it will largely influence the decision of the MPC.
Slower month-on-month inflation, because headline inflation, even core inflation, is still elevated.
Yeah, and if you notice, the month-on-month trend, has been slowing even in the last period. So the MPC is largely, looking at this inflationary trend, and the drivers, which is basically food inflation as well, is what they would also be considering. So that would largely feed into their consideration. Okay,
to wrap this up, for next week, what stocks should we watch out for?
Well, investors largely would, want to take positions on fundamentally sound, tickers, and we're looking at stocks that have also, shed some weight in the previous period and now provide, that potential for appreciation.
Re-entry point for investors. Okay, right. We'll leave it there. Victory, thank you so much. Pleasure having you on the show today. Victory George, Investment Research Analyst at Meristem Securities, taking us through trading this week at Nigeria's stock market.